We're back. I'm talking about Cyberpunk again. But I'm not just going to be talking about Cyberpunk, I'm going to be talking about cyberpsychos. And what are some potential causes to cyberpsychosis? I'm mainly going to be talking about what it is, what it does, what are some potential causes, and if there's an actual cure for it. So, first of all, what is a cyberpsycho? Well, in Cyberpunk 2077, Edgerunners the anime, and the original Cyberpunk tabletop game that all of these are based on, it's mostly described as someone who has had some sort of existing psychotic tendencies or mental instability and gets a bit too many cyber augments, losing their sense of identity and making their violent tendencies way more likely depending on how severe they have it. This, by the way, makes me halfway to becoming a cyber psycho, as I took one of those psychopath tests and this was my result, meaning if we can invent cyberware, I can become a cyber psycho. That'd be pretty cool. As for what it does, it mainly makes you lose sight of yourself, usually seeing something that's not actually happening in front of you. One example could be you might see some mercenaries or like some really bad like corpos, and they could be shooting at you, and so obviously you pull out your gun and you shoot them. But in actuality, it's actually your family or friends, and you've just killed all of them. That kind of sucks. Cyberpsychosis has a wide range of what it can do to a person, and it very heavily relies on what their personality is. In terms of symptoms, they're very gradual, usually starting with stopping of self preservation and distancing yourself from others like friends or family. It then devolves even further with identifying more with machines more than people, and also stopping of things that give you pleasure, such as like eating or sleeping. This eventually usually warps into human contempt, just like hating people in general, and finally violence. But there have been some cases of cyberpsychos not being violent at all, and instead having other tendencies, such as like fragmented personality, like split personality disorder, being kleptomaniacs, so like just needing to steal things constantly, or compulsive lying. But violence is the most common in most people. There are many variations of cyberpsychosis, ranging from low functioning to high functioning, which can be easily described by the average psycho on the streets who blindly kills people would be considered a low functioning psycho. People like David Martinez in the anime, who have some recollection of what's going on, but still aren't fully aware of what's going on around them, make them a medium functioning cyber psycho. And lastly, with like people like Adam Smasher, who is a really high functioning psycho. He can converse easily with people, has recollection of who he is while still being very violent in tendency and not having a huge amount of human mentality to him. As for why different people have different tolerances to cyberpsychosis, that I think mainly has to do with their mentality and how they see things and themselves. Remember that this illness is just happening in the brain and is very reliant on who you are, and uses that to cause different symptoms. But I believe that mentality is the main thing that lets you have this higher functioning. The street psychos are most likely addicts, and I'm gonna be honest, probably don't have a very good life, whereas David thought he was invincible and only really started going in a downward spiral after his life started crumbling apart. Finally, with Adam Smasher, who was in the army, got kicked out of said army and became a mercenary, he never really had a huge amount of humanity in him in the first place and always viewed others as lower than him. So after he got blown up by like a rocket and put back together as a cyborg, it didn't really affect him that much. On top of this, cyberpsychosis isn't that big of a problem in Cyberpunk the game. Back when implants were more fresh, like when they first started inventing them, there were a lot more psychos than now, thanks to improvements in technology and like mindset, because we became more acclimated to having these implants in us. But if you do want to see a huge amount of psychos, just look at the Maelstrom gang, where a third of its members are actually cyberpsychos, and the rest of them are on the borderline of being them. As for the causes of cyberpsychosis, specifically, no one fully knows what happens and how it happens, but there are many theories as to what it could be. One of the first theories that took hold is that each person actually has a certain amount of cyber capacity that their brain can handle before going cyber psycho. This has been proven through the medias of the series. Another theory is that the psychosis will only happen if you have some sort of mental illness. This hasn't been outright proven, but we definitely do see that people with illnesses such as depression or PTSD are way more likely to get cyberpsychosis. The next theory is mostly based on mental breaks. So when something happens to someone that is just too much for their brain to handle, they tend to go into a breakdown. It happens quite often in real life to people, and basically when someone goes into the breakdown, they're more susceptible to getting cyberpsychosis. This can range from your entire life falling apart, or having someone just die that you care about. The last and weirdest theory is that corporations are bugging their market cyberware with a virus, so that if you go above a certain threshold of cyberware, it will inject the virus into you and turn you into a cyber psycho. This theory doesn't really have any proof other than some talk about it in the game for like a potential reason why cyberpsychosis happens, but it's never really built upon. It might make sense as a reason why corpos don't have a very high amount of cyberpsychos in like their employees, but that's easily disproven via Militech, who has numerous cyberpsychos from testing equipment usually, but that could also be a way to ensure that they get their equipment back so that they don't steal the equipment, while also getting a lot of combat data because cyberpsychos get really violent. Also, I just thought of this. Usually you go cyberpsycho from having a weapon installed into you, but I'm like pretty sure that it doesn't matter what cyberware you have, and it's just the fact that you have like metal being put into you. So that technically means that someone could go cyber psycho from having like their rib cage replaced with like a titanium one. It's really funny to me because everyone's all like the SWAT teams are gonna be making fun of you. Like, you went cyber psycho after getting an armor plate on his shoulder. Like, well, I mentioned how to cure cyberpsychosis. There actually isn't a true cure, as it can never fully go away and can only be mitigated to a certain degree. As for what the cure is, it is basically just therapy. It forces the patient to undergo therapy, make them think that they're a normal person again, and help them be put back into society. Obviously, this isn't perfect and won't work 100% of the time, and also will never make them the same as they once were, but it does slightly help them out. Although, usually this doesn't get to happen though, as cyberpsychos usually kill people first, and then the equivalent of a SWAT team on steroids comes down and kills them instantly, so they can't be saved. But there is always a small chance that you can either get to them before they get violent, or if the violence is in like a smaller area, like an alleyway, or I don't know, like in the middle of the desert. Lastly, there is one final way to help cyberpsychos, being a psycho shrink is what it's called. A shrink being the slang for a therapist in the real world, so it's just a psychotherapist. Basically, what they do after a psycho is subdued is turn off all their cybernetics so as to not have any like further decay of self, which the therapy that I mentioned previously also does. But they also forcibly plug their system, like their wire. They plug into their system and basically turn their consciousness and brain into like a puzzle, and then they're able to like piece their personality back together as much as they can. Overall, while cyberpsychosis is just something you basically brush off in the series, as it doesn't really affect you unless you're like playing the tabletop game, and then it is something that can. Um, I'd very much like the next game to explore it a lot more, other than just like random glitches that can happen on your screen, and having you actually go cyber psycho, like you might pass out and then wake up and like a whole bunch of people are dead, or maybe even just having like everyone you know in the story just go cyber psycho and die. I feel like it'd be a lot more impactful and not have it just be like a thing that exists. But anyway, remember that cyberpsychosis is just a small price to pay for having some cool ass implants. Thank you. Goodbye.